Welcome to the arena, where sometimes the hardest part is showing up. My name is Linda McLaughlin. Thank you for being here. This episode is challenging. It touches on a subject that is difficult for us to speak about. Many of us have known someone who committed suicide. Many more have tried or contemplated it at some point in their life. This is one man's story. The world would have been robbed of his presence and his gifts had he been successful. We may not feel it or understand it now, but each day is an opportunity to start again. You can find the light. Thank you for listening. This is episode 12. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Rodrigo Bressane?
Yes, the way we say it in Brazil is Rodrigo Bressane. That would be the Brazilian way of saying it. But that name, which I thought it was Italian, because that's my heritage, I've learned it's actually found in France more often than not. And I have no connection with France whatsoever. So I don't know if it's originally pronounced in a different way, but Rodrigo Bressane is the way we would say it in Brazil. But I love all the ways that people say it differently, like Bressane. There is the Siri way, there is the Alexa way. So
Bressane. You're going to get a lot of that in the U.S. for sure.
I do. I get a lot of that. Yes.
Oh my goodness. That's fantastic. So welcome, Rodrigo Bressane.
That was very good. That was
Rodrigo Bressane.
Welcome to Brazil. You are vouched.
Fantastic. We just met yesterday, and I spoke to you briefly about your story and your life, and I just wanted to welcome you to the arena. I was really taken with the story that you shared with me yesterday. I need to go back and read the rest of it. The name of your blog is What Is It Like to Attempt Suicide and Fail?
That is the title of the series. So that initiated the series of this, because I used to post on Medium before, but other things, other topics. But then that series needed to happen. And this was the original post that started it all and that made it into almost like a book.
What I know of you is that you're a son, a father, an incredible photographer, an entrepreneur, soon to be the director of Lumino in the US, and the survivor of a suicide attempt. Did I?
Yes, I think you got it better than I could tell myself. You got it all.
I have to say, in reading parts of this series that you shared, I just was taken in by how courageous you were to provide a day-by-day account of your first days of surviving your suicide attempt and what went through your mind, what you experienced, what the people around you were doing, dealing with becoming medicated and treated and the interaction with the other patients. I laughed at times because there was that kind of pathos that was completely arresting. I noted at one point that you had over 15,000 people reading this and following you. It's just remarkable. You must have had an enormous impact on those people's lives. And no doubt people who were considering following a path of self-destruction. So I'll love to hear what your thoughts are.
First of all, thank you for the intro. I think it was a good read of what happened and what I do. You put me in a very good light, so thank you so much. Yes, the experience was, now thinking back, I think it was both the worst thing that ever happened to me and the best thing that ever happened to me. It was a suicide attempt, as terrible as it is. When it fails, it reboots you. Well, of course, I'm talking about my own experience and other people experience it differently. But in my case, it felt like a reboot, for better and for worse. Lots of good things in my life were crushed, and lots of bad things in my life were crushed. And I had this incredible opportunity to start over. This is the most interesting part of it all. I know the story of how it happened and the time I spent on that clinic taking care of myself or going through that recovery process is very interesting and full of rich stories and characters and funny people, sad people with very dark pasts, people with very sad pasts, people who made it, people who didn't make it. But I still think that this part that I'm living right now is the real deal, because now I have to figure out everything again. And it's very easy to, even though I'm calling it a reboot, I'm calling it a restart, it's very easy to reboot badly and get back on a track of self-destruction or just depression. It's very important to keep reminding myself that there is a way out, there is a better way, and I can, with some effort, find ways around the blues and the sadness and all the things that try to keep me attached that day when I tried to kill myself. That is the challenge now that I face, is to every day wake up. And even though most days, and that's the truth, it's not just many days, it's most days, you wake up and you still can find a reason to be around, but you tell yourself that it's worth it. And then it works. And then you get up and you do things and you keep acting as if everything is better than it feels. And what happens is that eventually you start feeling that. You start feeling exactly like you are pretending it to be. And that's been a good thing. So I guess that's a big summary of how I've been taking it from that moment and forward.
So let's go back to the beginning. What was conversation like around the dinner table when you were growing up?
I was raised in a very evangelical family. In Brazil, it's very similar to the US and Canada. Many missionaries and religious missions originated in the US and eventually went to Brazil. So I was raised in that environment, and my dad eventually became the pastor. It was always like a mini service every meal. I was very engaged with the faith. I used to teach on Sundays to the youth of the church. I could say that, especially when I was very engaged, it gave me a sense of authority that is, I guess it's peculiar to some people of faith, when you think you know everything. So it's not like you're looking for answers, you already have them. I was very rigorous with my faith. I was always trying to live by the rules. And that has a big problem, because when you are very strict with the rules and with your faith, the pain of failing is greater.
What brought you to that moment of despair?
It's interesting because when my suicide attempt happened, I wasn't religious anymore. I lost my faith completely when I was around 23, 24. I went to Germany to live for 1 year. I was working there. I was very young, but I was already married. I already had a 3-month-old daughter. I got disconnected from that environment and from that circle of friends and subjects and conversations. That gave me some time and opportunity to listen to other things and to see other things and to have some personal debates about things. I started questioning things inside of the church, and that for the first time read the Bible, which was something I hadn't done, and most people that are in the church, they don't actually do. And I read it, I read it cover to cover. It was very quickly, and I found lots of troubling facts that I wanted to dispute. But after a while, after disputing many things that people believed and were teaching in the church that I thought was wrong, I was left with the things that I believed and the things that I thought was right and I thought were true. And then I started questioning them as well. To make a long jump into what took me into that moment of despair, I think it was more simple than that. It was the fact that I was diagnosed with a bipolar disorder, and I was dealing with this state of being depressed and hyper ready for everything in very short blocks of time. And after being stable for a very long time, then I just because of work and relationship and all sorts of human shenanigans, I was finally into an abyss and into a long stretch of depression that at one point it just became so strong that you see no other way. And it's not like one thing that happens. For instance, when I tried to kill myself, I had already about 3 years, if not more, of accumulated readings on how to kill myself. So it was like that possibility, that door was there for a long time. It was just not open. But one day it opens and you jump. That's kind of how I see it.
And you referenced that Robin Williams having committed suicide, and I think of Anthony Bourdain as somebody else who, for me, had a huge impact when I learned of his suicide. And he spoke and wrote often about the black dog that is present and follows you around and is just always there like a weight.
Yes, I write about what I call the monster. And then later on, I was reading about the black dog. And I was like, oh, that's exactly what I was talking about. When I go back and read things that I wrote about this, and I do it very rarely. First of all, I don't recognize the person, and it's a different person that I am right now. In many ways, it's a better person. For one thing, it's a better writer. I don't know what's the deal there, but I can't get back to that mojo. Sometimes people think that suicide it's an evil thing to do because it shows you have no regard for your family and friends. It's easy for them to see suicide from the perspective of who's not committing suicide. So how can you do that? And people have asked me, you didn't think about your children? You didn't think about your kids? And sadly, the answer is no. Because if you did think about that, you would not do it. You would pause. You would try something else. But suicide, it's the last thing. It's the very last thing you can do. So yes, of course, you've considered everything else that your mind was able to consider. And if you're not considering obvious things that you're not thinking about, it's because your mind is not capable of doing that at that moment. And that's why I think this exercise, this daily exercise of telling yourself that things are better than you feel they are, than you think they are, it's important because it's like you have to tell your depressed self that reality is not what it seems to be for your other person. And I think that's an important lesson that stuck with me. And I guess I'm getting to that because of this feeling of suicide being something very pernicious and evil to others. When it's only the door that you see open at that moment, it's very inviting because it is one door that will absolutely remove that thing that you're feeling inside of your chest.
What does it not give you?
That's an interesting question. I was reading a few letters by the philosopher Seneca the other day on death. And it's interesting because and I'm by no means an expert. I might be knowledgeable on the topic of death, but I'm not very knowledgeable on the topic of Seneca. The perspective he gives you is that true happiness comes from not just preparing for your life, but preparing for your death. If you prepare for your death, you don't fear it.
What does living a courageous life mean to you?
I like to think that courage has levels and degrees, and perspective changes the way courage is driven. I think you can live a courageous life by doing the things you are afraid to do, by doing the things you think you're not capable of, and by doing the things you think you should not do. For some people, that might be going to war. For some people, that might be living a bad relationship. And that's why I talk about perspective, because honestly, I don't think I live a courageous life at all. But in my case, you could say that waking up every morning and doing something when many days you feel like it's not worth even being around, that could be akin to being courageous. But I try not to think as myself doing things because I'm being courageous. It's more like I need to survive. And when you need to survive, you just do things that you wouldn't do. One image that never leaves my mind is those people who were jumping from the World Trade Center. And it's obvious that they didn't want to jump. But it's also obvious that they couldn't stand the fire and the heat, and jump was the next option. So was it courageous to jump, or was it just survival? Were they just trying to survive for another few seconds? And perhaps that is very courageous. That is very brave. So I think it depends on how you frame it. I think in the end, it's all about trying to survive. And I think if you live your life by doing things, by taking risks and overcoming bad things that happen, that takes courage. And it doesn't matter if the degree of courage is not the same as your neighbor or as your friend that sacrificed maybe a limb or his life in a war. It takes choice. It takes willpower. It takes that decision to stand up and do something that your better judgment tells you not to. And it's hard. It's very hard.
What impact do you want to have on the world?
I believe that the greatest thing I can do, and don't laugh, but the greatest thing I can do is to not mess up other people's lives. So I'm trying to stay out of the way of people who will make an impact in the world. If I do that, I think I'll be glad already. But more seriously, I think the things that I know how to do, like the things that I'm competent at, if I can find a way to use that to change one person or one thought or one minimal thing, I want to do it. And purpose is that interesting thing. I told about my break away from religion, from faith, and people sometimes confuse that, like you no longer have a purpose. And we make purpose every day. So right now, the purpose of my life is this conversation with you, Linda. It's the most important thing that I can think of. And it will change tomorrow to something else. But one thing that I certainly want to do is to use my abilities to affect people in a good way, either by sharing them so they can replicate it and they can do something else. I think photography is something amazing. Photography, you can rescue. You can not just preserve memories with photography, you can rescue memories, you can promote memories, you can promote conversation, you can change regimes with photography. It's very powerful. I will try to do as much as I can with my skills, and I'll try to share as much as I can of my skills. And I think that's the way I can impact the world somehow. That's one way that I can see myself touching in other areas and affecting other people's lives just by sharing and doing what I know how to do. When I was in the clinic, I got an email from a girl in Brazil, and she wrote that she had a photography session with me many years prior, and I didn't know, but when she went to be photographed by me, she couldn't look at herself in the mirror because she could not accept the way she looked. And she was married, and her husband, apparently, by what she told me in the letter, would measure her to see if she was gaining weight, and he would recommend a diet. Basically, what she told me is that after she had the session with me, by looking at the photographs, she realized she was beautiful. And because of that session, she was able to end that relationship, to get a divorce. She was happily remarried and living a fulfilling life. And she was sharing that with me and thanking me for that photo shoot that we did. And imagine, I was in the clinic. I was already crying for no reason. So that didn't help. I was in pieces. And at the same time, just amazed at how I didn't know the story. I didn't know anything. So it was an accidental impact I had, but it was a very important impact nonetheless. So maybe that impact is happening elsewhere and I don't know about it. And to be honest, I don't need to know about it. The only thing I want to is to keep doing it, keep doing that kind of thing. Perhaps some people here and there get a better deal in life.
Accidental impacts. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share that you haven't already?
One thing that I think it's always important is that mental health is serious business. It's very difficult for people who are lucky not to have any issues on that department, to understand what it is like to have them, because it's very difficult to explain. Because it's difficult to understand, it's difficult to comprehend, and it's difficult to accept, and it's very difficult to help. Reading is something that's very important for those around people dealing with mental health. Just read about it and you will start to identify red flags. You start to identify situations where that person might be signaling something. And of course, seek professional help. Lots of people wrote me when I was in the clinic just asking for answers for many things, and I had to decline because even though I had firsthand experience of some things, you don't want to be advising people with bad advice. So yeah, just read about it and try to get professional help. And what I would say, just try to take your love bar a bit higher because they need it.
The best part of doing this podcast is having the opportunity to speak to people like you who, through listening to your story, have an impact on me. And this conversation will have an impact on me in my life, most definitely. It's been a real privilege to meet you just yesterday and to have the opportunity to have this conversation in the context of the podcast. Thank you so much for those accidental moments. I think for people who are followed by that black dog and who are struggling, especially in this time of pandemic, there's a lot of anguish out there from people who have lost loved ones, who miss loved ones, who miss that human connection. It's so important to have that message of hope and resilience in the world. And so thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on that today.
Thanks for having me, Linda. It was a real pleasure.
Be well, and I look forward to watching you continue to have those tiny accidental impacts.
To a lot more of those.
Yes, thank you so much. These accidental moments can change the trajectory of someone's life. We may never know the impact we have on others and how we're helping them. We're all needed. Seeking professional help is so important. Speaking about this pain is essential. I will share some resources for mental health in the show notes and on my website, linda-creates.com, and on my coaching website, lindamclaughlin.com. I will also share a link to the series that Rodrigo references in our conversation, as well as to some of his wonderful photography. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, and if you feel someone else might benefit from listening to this episode, please share it. Leave a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts. I look forward to sharing my next guest story of being a successful trainer, entrepreneur, CrossFit and weightlifting coach. She is positive, powerful, and helped me find my fitness mojo earlier this year. Until next time, my name is Linda McLaughlin in The Arena.